In the winter of 1932, a mother in the Oklahoma Panhandle could feed 6 people on what wouldn't buy a candy bar today. Her secret sat in a tin box on the back of the wood stove. Little dried cubes of concentrated soup she'd made herself when the store shelves went bare. Drop one into a pot of boiling water, and supper appeared out of almost nothing. Number 8 on this list was guarded like cash in a coffee can. Number 3 was so clever that food companies later sold the very same idea back to us for $1. And number 1 was the beating heart of the Depression kitchen, a pot that in some homes never once went cold. These 25 forgotten soup cubes carried millions of Americans through the hungriest decade this country ever knew. Hit subscribe, and let's count them down. Number 25, the vegetable scrap cube. Before a single carrot peel hit the trash, your great-grandmother had a jar on the counter catching every trimming. Onion ends, celery leaves, carrot tops, potato skins, the woody base of a cabbage. When the jar filled, she'd simmer the lot for 2 hours in a heavy pot, strain it through a flour sack cloth, then boil the liquid down hard until it went thick and dark as molasses. She'd pour that reduction into an ice tray, let it set on the cold windowsill overnight, and pop out little brown cubes that kept for weeks. 1 cube dropped into hot water became the base for any soup she had scraps to fill it with. It cost her nothing, literally nothing, just the peelings headed for the hog bucket. In a decade where a nickel mattered, turning garbage into flavor wasn't a trick. It was survival. Number 24, onion skin broth. Nobody told the papery skins of an onion they were worthless, so your great-grandmother put them to work. She'd save the dry outer layers in a paper sack until she had a good handful, then boil them slow with a pinch of salt. The skins bled a deep amber color into the water, and a faint sweetness that made thin soup taste like it had been cooked with real meat. Boiled down and set into cubes, that onion essence became the difference between broth that tasted like poverty and broth that tasted like care. Home economics agents traveling the Dust Bowl counties taught this at church basement meetings, spreading the word that the onion's cheapest part carried its best flavor. A 3-cent onion suddenly did the work of 2. Families learned to see gold where the grocer saw trash. Number 23, potato water concentrate. Every time she boiled potatoes, and she boiled them nearly every day, your great-grandmother caught the cooking water instead of pouring it down the drain. That cloudy liquid was thick with starch, and starch was the closest thing a broke family had to a thickener. She would reduce a quart of it down to a scant cup, salt it, and freeze it in the icebox tray. Dropped into a watery vegetable soup, 1 cube gave the whole pot body that clingy, satisfying weight that made a thin meal sit heavy and warm in a working man's stomach. Bread bakers used it too, swearing it made a softer crust. It sounds like nothing, water off a pot of spuds, but in a house where flour was measured by the spoonful, a free thickener that stretched every soup was worth its weight in the coin she didn't have. Number 22, carrot top and celery leaf cubes. The frilly green tops most folks tossed were, in the Depression kitchen, the whole point. Carrot greens carried a bright, grassy bite, and celery leaves packed more of that celery punch than the pale stalks ever did. Your great-grandmother chopped them fine, pounded them with a little salt in a bowl until they wept their juice, then pressed the paste into small cubes and dried them by the stove. A single cube crumbled into a pot, woke up flavors that had gone flat. This was seasoning. Before seasoning came in a shaker anybody could afford. The relief line families who grew a few rows in a vacant lot knew that the part of the vegetable the market threw away was the part that made supper taste alive. Waste 1 leaf, and you'd wasted a meal's worth of flavor. Number 21, bean pot liquor cubes. After a long pot of beans simmered down, most of the flavor wasn't in the beans at all. It was in the liquor, that thick, smoky, brown broth at the bottom. Your great-grandmother never let it go. She'd boil the leftover bean liquid down until it turned to a dark paste, then set it into cubes that carried the deep, earthy richness of a whole afternoon's cooking. Weeks later, one cube in hot water rebuilt that flavor in minutes. No beans required. It made cornbread suppers taste like there'd been meat in the house. A pound of dried beans cost a dime and fed a family for days. But the liquor was the bonus, the second meal, hiding inside the first. Nothing about that pot was ever allowed to leave the kitchen unused. Number 20. Tomato skin cubes. When canning season came and the garden or the relief garden gave up its tomatoes, your great-grandmother peeled dozens of them for putting up. But the skins never hit the trash. She simmered them down with the cores until they broke into a bright red concentrate, tart and sweet at once, then dried it into cubes stacked in a tin. Through the dead of winter, when fresh anything was a memory, one of those cubes brought summer back to the table. Dropped into water with a little flour, it became tomato soup. Stirred into beans, it became something almost Italian in a kitchen that had never heard the word. That deep red flavor, saved from the peelings of August, was sunshine. A family could ration all the way to spring. Number 19. Corncob broth cubes. Here's the first one that stops people cold. After the corn came off the cob, most folks fed the cobs to the animals. Your great-grandmother boiled them first. Bare corn cobs, simmered an hour, gave up a milky, faintly sweet stock that tasted unmistakably of corn. The same trick pig farmers and country cooks had passed around for generations. She'd reduce that liquid, cube it, and dry it. In the middle of a January, with nothing green in sight, a corn cob cube in a pot of water became creamed corn soup with a splash of milk, or the base of a chowder built from a single potato. The cob, that hard, useless thing headed for the fire, held a whole soup inside it. All it cost was the patience to boil what everybody else was burning. Number 18. Dried mushroom base. For the families with a woodlot or a shady fence row, wild mushrooms were free food and free flavor, but they came all at once and spoiled fast. So your great-grandmother dried them hard on strings above the stove, then ground the driest ones to a coarse powder pressed into flavor cubes. A single cube carried a deep, meaty, almost beefy richness that no vegetable could match, the closest thing to a steak that a meatless week ever saw. She used them carefully because a good haul had to last. Dropped into a thin barley soup, one mushroom cube fooled the tongue into thinking there was more in the pot than there was. In lean years, fooling the tongue was half the cook's job, and mushrooms were the honest trick that never let her down. Number 17. Cabbage core cubes. A head of cabbage cost a few cents and fed a family for days, but that hard, white core in the center usually got cut out and thrown away. Not in your great-grandmother's kitchen. She would boil the cores with the tough outer leaves nobody wanted, drawing out a peppery, faintly sweet broth, then reduce it to cubes. That cabbage essence became the soul of a winter soup, especially the kind built around a single sausage, or a knuckle of bone stretched across a whole pot. The German and Polish families who had carried their soup traditions to the mill towns knew the cabbage held more than the leaf. Nothing about that vegetable was allowed to leave the table uneaten, right down to the woody heart most cooks tossed without a thought. Number 16. Split pea concentrate. Long before a soup came in a can, your great-grandmother made her own split pea powder in a form she could store. She would cook a pot of split peas down to a smooth, thick puree, spread it in a thin layer on a greased pan, and dry it slow in a cooling oven until it cracked into brittle sheets she broke into cubes. Reconstituted in hot water, one cube bloomed back into a thick, hearty pea soup, the kind that stuck to a coal miner's ribs on a freezing shift. This was survival food in its purest form, cheap protein that's stored for months without an icebox. When the ham bone came around, she would add it. When it did not, the peas alone carried the meal, dense and green and filling in a way that made a family forget, for one bowl, how empty the cupboards really were. Number 15, barley water base. Barley was pennies a pound and endlessly patient, so your great-grandmother kept a jar of it working overtime. She would cook barley soft, then save the thick, silky cooking water and reduce it into cubes that thickened and enriched anything she dropped them into. Barley water had a reputation stretching back generations as food for the sick and the weak, gentle on the stomach and quietly nourishing. In a decade when medicine cost money nobody had, a barley cube in warm water was what a mother gave a feverish child, and what stretched a nearly empty soup pot into one more serving. It asked for almost nothing and gave back body, warmth, and the plain, honest comfort of grain. Cheap, forgiving, and always in the cupboard, barley was the quiet workhorse of the hungry years. Number 14, ham bone glaze cubes. Here comes a controversial one. When a family was lucky enough to get a ham, and that might be twice a year, the meat was gone in a day, but the bone worked for a month. Your great-grandmother boiled that ham bone again and again, and each batch of broth came out a little thinner. So she'd combine the strong first boilings, reduce them hard, and set the concentrated result into cubes she rationed like gold. One smoky, salty cube turned a pot of plain beans or greens into something that tasted like there was pork in the house when there hadn't been for weeks. Now, here's what stings. The company men who later sold ham-flavored bouillon in a jar for real money were selling the exact thing your great-grandmother made for free from a bone she'd already picked clean 3 times over. Number 13, chicken feet stock cubes. Nothing about a chicken went to waste, and the feet, which the butcher practically gave away, made the richest stock of all. Your great-grandmother scalded and cleaned them, then simmered them for hours until the water turned golden and thick with natural gelatin, the stuff that made broth cling to a spoon and set like jelly when it cooled. She'd cube that gelatin-heavy stock, and those cubes were the prize of her tin, the base of the soup she made when someone was sick or when company came. A dozen chicken feet cost a few cents, or nothing if you kept your own hens. Yet they gave up a broth so rich the fancy restaurants of the era used the same trick. The poorest part of the poorest bird made the most nourishing pot on the block. Number 12, marrowbone cubes, second pattern break, and this one's the heavyweight. Marrowbones were the cheapest thing at the butcher's counter, sometimes free for the asking because most folks didn't know what to do with them. Your great-grandmother did. She'd roast them first to deepen the flavor, then simmer them all day until the marrow melted out and the broth turned deep, dark, and beefy. Boiled down, it set into cubes so rich a single one could carry a whole pot of vegetable soup on its shoulders. Food scientists today will tell you marrow broth is packed with exactly the nourishment a growing child needs, the collagen and minerals that build strong bones. Your great-grandmother didn't have the word for it. She just knew the near-worthless bone made the strongest soup in the house, and she never let one leave the shop without her. Number 11, fish frame cubes. For the families near a river, a lake, or the coast, fish were free food for anyone with a line and patience. But the real cook's treasure wasn't the fillet, it was the frame, the head and bones left after the meat came off. Your great-grandmother simmered those frames, strained out the bones, and reduced the delicate broth into cubes that carried the clean, briny taste of the water. One cube built a chowder around a single potato and a splash of milk, a full, warming meal from the parts everybody else buried in the garden. This was the thrift of the fishing towns and the river bottoms, where a family understood that throwing away the frame was throwing away the second dinner hiding inside the first. Number 10. Rendered fat flavor cubes. Fat was flavor, and in the Depression, flavor was hard to come by, so nothing greasy ever went to waste. Your great-grandmother saved the drippings from every scrap of bacon, every rendered bit of salt pork, every skimming off a stew. She'd clarify it, mix it with a little browned onion and salt, and set it into small cubes she kept cold. A single one melted into a pot of plain beans or a mess of greens delivered the rich, savory backbone that told a hungry family the meal was real. It's the same reason a spoonful of bacon grease still makes cornbread taste like home. In a decade of meatless suppers, a fat cube was the ghost of meat, the memory of it, dropped into water to make the plainest food taste like there'd been a pig somewhere in the story. Number 9. Kitchen garden herb cubes. Third pattern break, and this one grew in a coffee can on the windowsill. Even the poorest relief family could sprout a little parsley, thyme, or sage, and your great-grandmother knew that a pinch of green was the line between food and flavor. But herbs faded fast, so she preserved them the smart way. She'd chop them, pack them tight into an ice tray, cover them with a little water or melted fat, and freeze them into cubes that locked in every bit of their punch. Months later, one herb cube dropped into a January soup carried the taste of a summer garden that had long since died in the frost. It cost her a few seeds and a sunny sill. Yet it did what money couldn't. It made a poor pot taste like it had been cooked by someone who still had something to give. Number 8. Milk gravy soup base. This was the one guarded like cash in a coffee can. When a family had a cow or shared one down the lane, milk was gold, but it soured in a day without ice. So your great-grandmother turned it into something that lasted. She would cook milk down with a little flour and fat into a thick, savory base, then chill it firm and cut it into cubes. Dropped into hot water, one cube became a creamy soup, the luxurious kind that made children think there was money in the house when there wasn't a dollar to be found. Cream of anything, built from a cube and whatever vegetable was left. In a world of thin, watery broths, a milk cube was decadence, and a mother who had a tin of them felt for a moment like she was still giving her family the best. Number 7. Roux cubes. The French cooks of Louisiana knew it, and the thrift of the 1930s spread it everywhere. A roux, just fat and flour cooked slow together, was the magic that turned water into gravy and thin broth into thick soup. But making it fresh took time and a careful hand, so your great-grandmother made it in big batches when she had the fat to spare. She'd cook the flour and fat to a deep, nutty brown, then cool it and cut it into cubes ready to grab. One dropped into a pot thickened the whole thing in minutes and gave it that toasted, comforting depth. It was convenience before convenience had a brand name, a shortcut that let a tired mother build a real soup at the end of a 14-hour day. Fat and flour, the two cheapest things in the house, married into the base of 100 meals. Number 6. Wild game stock cubes. In the country, when the shelves went bare and the relief check was late, a man and a rifle kept the family fed. Rabbit, squirrel, whatever the woods gave up went into the pot, and your great-grandmother wasted none of it. After the meat was picked clean, the bones went back to simmer into a rich, gamey stock she reduced into cubes and stored against the lean weeks ahead. One cube carried the deep, wild flavor of a hunt into a soup weeks after the meat itself was long gone. This was the taste of self-reliance, of families who fed themselves off their own land and their own skill when the towns had nothing to sell them. The woods didn't care about the stock market. A rabbit was a rabbit, and every bone of it went into the tin. Number 5. The perpetual pot cubes. Fourth pattern break, and here is where the whole idea comes together. Many kitchens kept what they called a stock pot going near constantly, a pot on the back of the stove that never fully emptied. Every scrap, bone, peel, and trimming went in, and every day some of the rich broth came out. When the pot ran especially strong, your great-grandmother skimmed off the best of it and cubed it, banking the flavor for the days the pot ran thin. Those cubes were a savings account made of soup, a hedge against the week the cupboard finally went truly empty. It was the deepest, most layered broth in the house, built from 100 meals stacked one on the next. A family that kept the pot alive was never more than one cube away from a real supper, no matter how bare the shelves. Number 4. Gelatin bone cubes. When the butcher had knuckle bones and joints, the parts thick with cartilage, your great-grandmother snapped them up because those were the bones that gave a broth its body. Simmered long and slow, they released so much natural gelatin that the cooled stock wobbled like jelly. And that was exactly the point. She'd cut that firm, quivering broth straight into cubes, no drying needed, and keep them cold, dropped into hot water. One melted into a broth so rich it coated the mouth, the kind that a doctor of the day would have called strengthening. For sick children, elderly parents, and mothers worn thin by worry, these were the cubes of care, the nourishment you gave the people you loved when there was little else you could do. The cheapest bone in the shop made the most healing pot in the house. Number 3. Homemade tomato bouillon. Here's the one the company sold back to us. Your great-grandmother took her garden tomatoes, cooked them down with a little onion, celery leaf, and salt into a thick, concentrated paste, then dried it into deep red cubes stacked in a tin. Dropped into boiling water, one became an instant cup of hot tomato broth, bright and savory, the perfect thing to warm a child walking home through the cold with no coat worth the name. It was healthy, it was cheap, and it stored all winter. A few years later, that exact idea, tomato concentrate in a cube, showed up on grocery shelves with a brand name and a price tag. Millions of families paid good money for the convenience of something their own mothers had made for free from the tomatoes rotting in the back row of the garden. The knowledge didn't vanish. It got sold. Number 2. The pocket broth cube. This one traveled. For the men riding the rails looking for work, and the fathers walking miles to a WPA job site, a hot meal at midday was out of the question. So your great-grandmother made cubes hard and dry enough to carry, wrapped in a twist of wax paper and tucked into a coat pocket. At noon, a man could beg a cup of hot water from a diner, or heat some over a campfire, drop in his cube, and have a bowl of soup where there'd been nothing at all. It was a whole meal that weighed almost nothing and cost almost nothing. Portable comfort for the people the Depression pushed onto the road. In a decade that scattered families across the country chasing work, that little cube in a pocket was sometimes the only warm thing a man had all day. Number 1. The Everything Cube. And at the very top, the king of them all, the cube that gathered every trick on this list into one. When your great-grandmother had a truly rich day, a ham bone, some marrow, a handful of vegetable scraps, a splash of the perpetual pot, she didn't spread it thin across one big pot. She concentrated all of it, boiled it down to its darkest, deepest essence, and set it into cubes she treated like currency. One everything cube could build a soup for a whole family out of nothing but water and whatever the day had left. It was the sum of a lifetime of thrift, the flavor of 100 meals compressed into something she could hold in her palm and hand down like an heirloom. In the hungriest years this country ever knew, that cube was security itself. As long as the tin held a few of them, no matter how bare the shelves went, your family would eat. That was the quiet genius of the Depression kitchen, and it's the wisdom we let slip away. There it is, 25 forgotten soup cubes that carried America through its hardest decade. From the humble vegetable scrap cube all the way up to the everything cube that stood between a family and an empty table. Which one surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments and try one this week. Then come back and tell me your grandmother knew something we forgot.